Welcome everyone. Good morning, early morning for some of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon and good evening to some of our friends that are connecting from the Asian continent. It's wonderful to have you here for our Linder Solidarity School. We are approaching the final couple of class sessions for this first experience of the Linder Solidarity School, which has had so many amazing topics of study and exchange with all of you. And it's been also wonderful to have a solid group of people who have been on every class. Very impressive example of discipline. So today and the remaining sessions that we have in our school are going to focus on the topic of solidarity and the construction of internationalism from a couple of different angles. And today will be a really interesting topic because for some people it also be very nostalgic, bring nostalgia, because we're going to be talking about what international solidarity looked like with Nicaragua, with the Sandinista Popular Revolution in the first phase of the revolution in the 1980s. So I'm going to introduce Peter Rosset, who's going to be here with us today. And then we're going to read a short text before we pass the floor off to Peter. So first of all, I want to say that a big thank you to Peter, who's made a big effort to join us today. He's currently based in Thailand doing some work there, so it's very late at night, which is why we have the session 1 hour earlier, and with the section that will be with him will end an hour and a half into the class, and then we'll use the last half hour to continue the discussion we started last week in our 3 breakout groups. So Peter Rosset is a professor in the Department of Agriculture, Society, and Environment at Ecosur Advanced Studies Institute in Chiapas, Mexico, and is also part of the Via Campesina international family. He was a staff member of the International Operating Secretariat for Via Campesina for a number of years. And he's also one of the founders of the network of the IALAs, the Latin American Institute of Agroecology, which we've been studying throughout this course. And he's written a lot of great, interesting articles. I recommend you read them, as well as books on agroecology, La Via Campesina, food sovereignty, and some really interesting work as well on the peasant-to-peasant methodology of massifying and territorializing agroecology. So today he's going to give kind of a short intro, a little bit about his time here in Nicaragua in the 1980s, because in addition to all the things that I just talked about, he was also here in the 1980s doing work. And then we're going to show a documentary and then have time for discussion. Before giving the floor to Peter, though, I thought usually we have an opening mystica, and one thing that we asked folks to do is talk to people that they know who were in Nicaragua in the 1980s this week. And we shared one testimony in our WhatsApp group for people to read. Hopefully we can hear more testimonies today. But wanted to go back to Ben Linder, who, as we know, we've named the school after him, another internationalist who lived in Nicaragua during the 1980s. And our friend Camilo Mejia is going to read a section of a letter that Ben wrote to his friends in the US shortly after he arrived to Nicaragua in September of 1983. So Camilo, go ahead.
Thank you, Erica, and good morning, everyone. Written by Ben Linder to friends in September 1983. Somoza left the country in shambles, flat broke. He took everything but the dead. Granted, there are still problems now, but there's a feeling of hope. There's a feeling of building a new country. At times, this exuberance leads to false hopes. Many more times, it leads to a sane life that has never before been experienced for the majority of Nicaraguans. It is hard for us to imagine the meaning of a paved street. In Nicaragua, there are 2 seasons, wet and dry. When it is wet, the mud is 2 feet deep. When it is dry, the dust permeates everything. Eating becomes like a picnic at the beach. All the food crunches with dust. Slowly, more and more streets are being paved. But that is only the physical benefits. The more important changes are the feelings of being in control. This is in control of walking out at night and not being afraid of being shot by the police, as was the case before 1979. It is establishing control of the neighborhood and the workplace. It is in education, healthcare, and word. This is control. Granted, there is still a long ways to go, but people are still fighting. Not fighting against the government, but rather fighting old habits, old customs, and the results of centuries of oppression. Unfortunately, at the borders, the struggle goes on militarily. The old enemies keep fighting with more and more US support. It is such a waste. I guess our government knows quite well how to drain an economy through military spending. Pardon me for speech making, but it is impossible to get a feeling for Nicaragua without a feeling of political struggle.
Thank you, Camilo. And also thank you to these words from Ben. I think that they're not uncommon testimonies of people who accompanied the revolution here in the 1980s. And so today we have with us Peter Rosset, who is also going to share a little bit about his experience and open a space for discussion for all of us. So Peter, pass the floor to you.
Well, thank you very much, Erica. And thank you, Fausto, and everybody at ATC for this invitation. It's great to see, or at least see the names posted on the screen here of people like Fausto, Edgardo, Catherine Hoyt, who I remember from the 1980s in Nicaragua, Edgardo, Magda. I'm assuming that Camilo is the Camilo Mejia, so that's a great honor as well. And it's great to see your smile there, Catherine. So I'm a little bit embarrassed about this, but this is something probably that only Fausto and Erica could talk me into doing, because I'm going to give a short introduction and then we're going to show a video which really feels totally ridiculous to me at this point in time, in which, amongst other people, I'm interviewed in it from the 1980s in Nicaragua, and it's just really embarrassing. So I guess this is a big favor to the ATC that I'm exposing myself to international ridicule by by Zoom. But anyway, there were a lot of us who are internationalists who were in Nicaragua in the 1980s. Ben Linder, I remember very well. My house by the tree in the middle of the road, I think, was the first place that he arrived at when he arrived in Nicaragua. And that was a very sad thing that happened to him, but very inspirational to all of us as well. So I'll just briefly tell a little bit about my story, and then we'll watch the absurd video, and then we can have a general discussion. I'm sure the video is going to bring back memories to Catherine, amongst other people. So I was a graduate student in the United States and a political activist, lifelong political activist in left causes. When the Nicaraguan Revolution happened, I'd been an activist with, God, what was I an activist? Against the war in Vietnam, support group of white youth supporting the Black Panther Party in New York, and a variety of other political struggles, and participating in the Latin American Solidarity Committee in Michigan, which was part of the Nicaraguan network, which I believe Catherine at some point was the national coordinator or director of. And the Nicaraguan Revolution happened, and it just by kind of, and I was a militant in a group called the New World Agriculture Group, which was like a loose association or a movement of people working in one way or another in issues related to agriculture, particularly agroecology, but not just agroecology, who had various kinds of leftward leanings. And so in this whole nexus of Latin American Solidarity, New World Agriculture Group, it turns out that a Nicaraguan exchange student had been living in the house of my major professor of my PhD program when the revolution happened. And he was called back to Nicaragua to take over an institute in the new revolutionary government in 1979. And then he wrote back to this Professor John Vandermeer, who was in this New World Agriculture group, and said that many of the technical staff in the ministries had left the country after the revolution, and that there was at least a medium-term shortage of technical staff for all kinds of different things, in particular agriculture. And so on the basis of that, we signed an agreement between the Ministry of Agriculture and Agrarian Reform, called Mirindra at that time, and this New World Agriculture group, to send people as exchange technical staff on a voluntary basis for all kinds of different things related to agriculture, from being researchers or technical staff in the Ministry of Agriculture, teaching at the Agriculture University, and other things like that. So I came down to Nicaragua in 1982. I had actually been living in Costa Rica for about a year before that, and went into the Ministry of Agriculture as a researcher on agroecology, what I still work on today, and was sent to an agricultural research experiment station in the state of province of Matagalpa, where Fausto is from, but not exactly where he's from, near the town of San Isidro in the Sebaco Valley. So I lived in San Isidro for a year and worked at this agricultural experiment station. That was like 82 to 83. Then I was transferred to Managua, where I worked at the Laboratory for Biological Pest Control, which is controlling pests without chemicals, which was behind the airport in Managua. And we were there working one day when there was a really loud noise, and we all went running out to see what was going on, and there was smoke coming from the airport, and it was when there had been an attack in a small plane on the airport, and the plane was shot down and crashed into the control tower of the airport. So I was 1 year in Matagalpa, then 1 year in Managua at this biological control lab. Then I went back, then I took an actual paid job in Costa Rica for a couple of years with something called CATIE, which was an International Agricultural Research Institute, through which I was able to get a project funded to come back to Nicaragua on integrated pest management, controlling pests without pesticides, and went back and worked once again in Mirindra, in the Ministry of Agriculture. In the middle, I forgot it. I was also a professor for a year at the Agricultural University, which was called the ISCA at that time, and then became the UNA. So I was there for a lot of interesting times. A time of very major debate that went on, for example, among staff inside the Ministry of Agriculture between two politically positioned groups with different positions. The majority position, we called them the desarrollistas, or the developmentalists, who did not believe in peasant agriculture, who believed in large-scale industrial agriculture, and were able to get most of the Sandinista revolutionary government investment and spending to be spent either on large-scale state farms or given as subsidies to the large-scale private sector, who are mostly counter-revolutionaries, but that didn't stop them from accepting money from the revolutionary government. And then the other group inside the ministry, which was the minority group, which I was part of, which were the campesinistas, or those who believed in peasant agriculture. And it seems like history gave us the reason, or came down on our side, because all of the investment in large-scale agriculture, both private and state, failed to be productive under conditions of war and a trade embargo, because large-scale agriculture depends on things like mechanical harvesters, which don't work if you don't have parts because there's a trade embargo, large-scale irrigation equipment, which doesn't work if you can't get supplies and parts, tractors, which don't work if you can't get parts and gasoline, and all pesticides, fertilizers, all kinds of stuff. And so the productivity was just about close to zero in the large-scale agriculture and both the on both the private and the state side. And peasant agriculture continued to be productive even under very difficult conditions, and the counter-revolutionaries attacking peasant co-ops in the north. And so that really cemented my lifelong role after that with the peasant movement. So after I ended up leaving Nicaragua, but years later, that's the reason why I ended up being a staff member along with Fausto and many other people in La Via Campesina for many, many, many years, because I became firmly convinced that that the solutions to feeding people and to not destroying rural areas lie with peasant agriculture, not with large-scale industrial agriculture, lie with agroecology, which was what I was working on way back when in the Ministry of Agriculture, even though we were a minority position in the ministry. So these are all kind of things that shaped one's lifetime. And also it was an amazing experience because it was along the tradition of internationalist solidarity. We were very aware, for example, of the Lincoln Brigade. Those of us who are from the United States were aware of the Lincoln Brigade in the Spanish Civil War. We were aware of all of the solidarity with Chile. Of course, there was the Allende government, but then there was the coup, and there were a lot of Chilean exiles. And there was a internationalist community with people from all over Latin America. I remember people from Brazil, from Colombia, from Argentina, from Chile, from many people from Mexico, from other countries in Central America, and from many countries in Europe. And it was a very heady experience to have internationalist left activists from all over the world together with our Nicaraguan comrades building a different society. And I guess another reflection that I'd like to make is when I see the more recent round of progressive governments in Latin America, like the Lula government in Brazil, or the Kirchners in Argentina, or Evo Morales in Bolivia, or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Rafael Correa in Ecuador, I see that they were not able to move nearly as far in terms of radical transformation of society because they came in through elections and were never really able to get a full grasp on the state itself. Even Hugo Chavez in Venezuela always had a tenuous grasp on the state, with a lot of state agencies resisting. And I won't say that that didn't happen in Nicaragua also, because it did happen in the sense that there were still a lot of Somocistas in the ministries. But the fact that the Sandinistas had triumphed through armed struggle meant that they really had the commanding position of power in society, and therefore it was possible to make much more revolutionary changes than we've seen in this more recent progressive cycle of governments. And so it's always been a little bit depressing for me to see the more recent cycle not reaching nearly as far, not even thinking about making radical transformations like the ones that I saw in Nicaragua at that time. You know, that doesn't mean that there weren't fatal flaws, and perhaps there was the external attacks from the United States, the same thing that we see happening with Venezuela, Cuba, Iran today. But there were also mistakes made in the conduct of the revolution itself. And for me, the principal mistake was precisely the one that I was involved in, which was betting on large-scale industrial agriculture and not betting on peasant campesino agriculture. Because when you have a trade embargo and a war, peasants don't need imported supplies to produce, large-scale producers do. And I feel like had the Sandinista revolution really bet on peasants, on campesinos, they would have had a better chance to resist so much aggression from the United States. It's an opinion I still have about Venezuela, for example, today. I just saw the latest emergency measures from the Maduro government, and I can't believe that they still haven't wholeheartedly adopted peasant agroecology as a way to survive US aggression. On the other hand, I accompany a lot the process of agroecology in Cuba. Cuba is now a major success in agroecology led by the National Peasant Organization, part of Via Campesina, sister organization to ATC, the ANAP. And also there's always a little bit of a power struggle between those in the Cuban government who still believe in large-scale industrial agriculture and those who believe in peasant agroecology, but it's peasant agroecology that's feeding Cuba today. So that to me continues to convince me that the correct line is the line that we're following in Via Campesina, and that the YALA in Nicaragua is following, which is building peasant agroecology. And that's the solution to a lot of the dilemmas that we face in society today. And so that's something, you know, that I believed way back when in the early 1980s in Nicaragua, although I was a lot more naive, as you'll see shortly in the video, embarrassingly so. But I feel like I know a lot more about it now, and I'm much more convinced than when I was more naive about it. So I suppose that's a good thing over the number of years that have passed. So I guess with that introduction, I can't find any other excuses for putting off this video any longer. So I guess we're going to have to see it now. So I'll turn off my video and my audio now. And then you can ask me questions or make comments afterwards or make fun of me.
Thanks, Peter. Promise we won't make fun of you. The documentary is really great, and we had a really collective process to subtitle the documentary. So just as a reminder, while Avery is uploading the documentary is majority in English and has Spanish subtitles. So you won't hear the interpretation as we're listening to the documentary, but we will share a link so that you can rewatch it after if you have any interruptions in the middle.
People should turn off their cameras during the documentary.
Welcome to Image Union, WTTW's weekly program featuring the work of independent producers, films and tapes you don't usually see on TV. Tonight you'll see a videotape about the United States citizens in Nicaragua. It was produced by Didi Halleck, and it's called Waiting for the Invasion.
Yeah, why are you waiting here?
Estamos esperando la invasión. A ver a qué hora se aproxima, pero estamos alerta.
You're waiting for the invasion. They can't.
Bueno, invasión ya sea una invasión norteamericana de los países vecinos que nos están agrediendo.
Condeca.
Y el Condeca.
United States of America.
Since 1853, the United States has invaded Nicaragua 14 times. Recently, the U.S. has again threatened to invade. This is the story of U.S. citizens who live in Nicaragua as they wait for the next invasion.
Nuestro siguiente programa, La Nueva Canción.
Well, it's a very interesting place to be, politically, socially, everything else. It's really a new society. It's changing a lot. You know, in people's daily lives, politics has a really large importance, and that's very different from the way we live in the United States most of the time.
The vast majority of the American citizens here are here because we want to help rebuild this country.
Many people want to have that experience of knowing, you know, what it is, what happens in a country after a revolution that is dedicated for the poor, for those who never had before. And so they want that experience, and they come down and share their talents.
It's been a very rich period in events for Nicaragua. You might say there's never a dull moment. There's always something happening.
everything here you do is a challenge. You know, just getting gas for your car is a challenge. Getting food is a challenge.
And yet it's very tense. A lot of times we can't get to sleep at night because we don't know whether your country is going to come in and invade you.
Esta es mi tierra, esta es mi agua, ningún yanqui hueputa pisará Nicaragua. Patria libre, o morir, patria o muerte, venceremos de la frontera, no pasarán, Pusañata, no pasarán, de Peña Blanca, no pasarán, de San Carlos, no pasarán, del Caribe, no pasarán. Keep your mouth, we don't want more Vietnam.
The military of Honduras stands posed to strike, and thousands of U.S. troops are conveniently in Honduras or off the shores of Nicaragua for so-called maneuvers. Reagan needs only to claim a pretext to put this force in motion. We have already gone on record with the U.S. government that we will not allow our safety here to be used as a pretext for intervention, as the medical students in Grenada were in that illegal and shameful case.
There's a real community of Americans living here, huh?
Yeah, there's quite a few of us. There's a guess of about 600. And as far as people working with the government, and collaborating in some sense with the process, there's about 300, I think. About 300 of us.
Well, the American community is made up of a lot of different people with a lot of different political points of view. And those that you saw demonstrating outside this embassy are opposed to the policy of the administration.
My people live in terror and in fear of these U.S.-supported counter-revolutionary task forces that have been penetrating our area, raping and torturing and killing my people.
I guess you don't strike me as the kind of person that goes to a lot of demonstrations.
No, this is my first.
So this is pretty important to you, or what's your feelings about this issue?
Well, I think what the Reagan administration is doing, supporting the Contras, is totally against all American principles. Totally.
I think that if the United States invades, they're going to have a lot of trouble on their hands. And I hope that they know that and don't do it. I think something has really gotten started here and is growing, and it's real passionate, man, It's real passionate, and I find a lot of passion in the people for what they are making for themselves.
At least 15 years ago, I came to Central America as a very idealistic teenager on a health project. And I lived in a poor little village for a while, and I was loved more than I was anywhere else. So I think from then on, I gave myself, I fell in love with Latin America and the people here. And so from then on, my life has been trying to help, in one way, doing solidarity work and human rights work, and also took on a professional career that I knew could help here.
My question about that demonstration is that I never know who those people are who demonstrate. They always show pictures in the paper and they say it's U.S. citizens who are demonstrating, but they're not U.S. citizens that I or any of the other Americans that I know have ever seen. I have the feeling that they live in a box and that they're brought out when there's a demonstration. And then the headlines we see say that U.S. citizens support the local government. That's my reaction to those demonstrations.
Is there coverage of the demonstration?
Yeah, right here. March of North Americans Against Aggression. I don't see me in this particular picture. Let's see if there's another one. Nope.
So you're not worried about getting your name on some list and
Here's my name.
Some CIA file? Or...
Well, I'm afraid that our name is already on those lists or those CIA files just for being in Nicaragua. The only thing that we can hope is that since we're not doing anything illegal, nothing will befall us for having come here, although people who've seen missing may want to wonder about that.
Has your family cautioned you about anything in particular?
Well, every time there's stuff in the U.S. press about an escalation of the war or a major new attack by the Contras or rumors of a U.S. invasion, they get very upset and call me up and want to know how I am and you sure you want to stay down there and that kind of stuff.
¿Cuántas quieres?
6, por favor.
6. ¿Y vos? 4. ¿Y vos? 1. ¿De
Ok, gracias. Nos vemos.
Bueno.
¿Hay huevos? No. No hay. Ok, gracias. ¿Hay huevos? No hay. Ok, gracias. No hay. No huevos. There's never any long-term scarcity of anything, but sometimes in some neighborhood, some days it'll be hard to get eggs. You'll have to go to a lot of different places, or another neighborhood it'll be hard to get cheese some days, or meat. So it's not like it's an overall scarcity, but there's still problems with distribution that the revolution hasn't been able to solve yet in just 4 years. Since the revolution, about a third of all of the peasants in the country so far have benefited from the agrarian reform, have received land. Many more have received full-time employment. So it's a situation that's changing. Unfortunately, it's difficult at this particular time in history to climb out of poverty because there's a worldwide recession, and especially the region is in a state of depression. So that this is a time where a country's doing well if it holds its own, and it would be unbelievable to actually increase. For example, in terms of economic growth this year, all of the countries in Central America have a negative rate of growth except Nicaragua, which is positive, but only positive 4%. Nevertheless, in terms of the horrible economic condition of the region, that's really a pretty, it's something to be proud of.
Radio Sandino, Managua, canta compañero, que tu voz sea
8:33.
I'm basically a biologist. That is, I didn't start out as an agronomist by any means. In fact, I used to work on seabirds in northern Alaska. Although I think basic research is important, I also believe in doing something that can be very useful. This is now what is called a state farm here in Nicaragua. Most of the state farm lands are lands that were owned by Somoza and were confiscated after Somoza fled the country. So this is one of those situations. It's a huge farm where they grow mostly cotton. It's almost primarily cotton. We have this experiment in maize, in corn. They're going to be starting some corn in this area, and so this is sort of an experiment in the area to find out what pest damage levels are like, how corn would do in this particular area. Aquí puede empezar solo vos, tuta. Solo uno. Solo un lado. There's a lot of opportunity to do something that you can see the result of. That's not always true in the States. You are free to do research in a lot of cases, but you're not going to be seeing that implemented in the States. And that's something that's very exciting here. It's very open, and you can see results very quickly. Corn is very important. It's an important basic grain, and they're importing corn right now. And one of the big goals is to become self-sufficient in corn. So that this experiment is part of a much larger program of trying to become self-sufficient in basic grains.
Bueno, lo que están buscando es el síntoma de achaparramiento en la hoja, porque no entrenudos cortos. Y cuando están otros mazorcas.
Para nosotros hemos hecho ver que ayuda mucho, los acompaña mucho pues, y los está dando y los está enseñando un poco más. La conciencia de ella es una tranquilidad.
They have a lot of practical knowledge about how crops are grown. You know, they've grown up with these things. They know a lot about just practically how people do things here, and so I'm able to learn a lot from them also. It's not just a one-way street. I learn what traditional agriculture has been like, and then I look for ways to improve that.
We're architects, we're engineers, we're agronomists, we're economists, we're healthcare workers, we're cultural workers, we're occupational hygienists. Basically, we're a whole range of professions, all here to contribute what we can, given our skills, to this process of reconstruction.
in Nicaragua, I'm doing things that I've always, dreamed of doing. Try a little this, that doesn't work, we'll try something else. You just have to be flexible and buy what you can and sell what you can. Things are scarce, products are scarce. The world economic situation isn't that great. I always wanted to have a farm, always wanted to have my own business, and have opportunities to set up new businesses. I work with my business associates, and you're able to do things on a private basis too. So it's.
You couldn't do that in the U.S.?
Sure, but you need a tremendous amount of capital to get started. Lifestyle here is much more relaxed than the States. In the States, sure, you make dollars, but you kill yourself in the process. Time you're about ready to retire, you can't enjoy it. Here, you can enjoy it while you're making it.
My company has been in business in the world for many, many years, and we generally take a very long-term view of any situation we're in. And I think we can afford to by our own history, that we know that when things are bad, they can get better. And I'm very sure that in Nicaragua, they will get better, and the economy will improve, and we will not be sorry to have remained in this difficult period.
¿Por qué? Why are you practicing this firefighting?
Porque a la hora de una guerra no sabemos qué nos va a tocar y tenemos que prepararnos en todo campo. Y claro, o sea que allí tenemos que demostrar el imperialismo, que a la vez que seamos mujeres no tenemos por qué temerle a nada, ni tenemos por qué no estar organizados, o sea que tenemos que saber de todo para a la hora sí que venga alguna agresión, saber defenderlos. O sea que si faltan los hombres, estamos las mujeres para poderle darle el apoyo necesario.
I think there's a lot of confusion as to what form an invasion would take if it came about. I have neighbors who are digging trenches in their backyards, and it's kind of a mania.
We're digging civil defense trenches to basically protect the children, because in the insurrection there was 50,000 deaths, and many of those were children. And so this country is taking measures to protect the children because they're the future for the country. They have a definite fear that there's going to be an invasion, and that's based upon the current actions of the Reagan administration on supporting the Contras and the actions that have been taken in the last 4 years by the Contras in this country. It's the first time I've really been this upset with the U.S. government. I spent 7.5 years in California Guard, spent 2.5 years in Peace Corps, and spent 8 years in local government. And it just is really appalling what the Reagan administration is doing to this country. Our government in the last decades and the century have done many things against the people, not necessarily the governments, but against the people of the Central American countries. I think Reagan be very foolish to launch any kind of an invasion of this country, because they're ready for anything they want to give them, short of an atomic bomb.
But does this mean you're, whose side are you on here?
Well, obviously I'm on the side of the people here.
be united in gratitude for our nation's peace and prosperity when so many in this world have neither. God has blessed America and her people, and it is appropriate we recognize this bounty. Now, therefore, I, Ronald Reagan, President of the United States of America, in the spirit of the Pilgrims, President Lincoln, and all succeeding presidents, do hereby proclaim Thursday, November 24th, 1983, as a National Day of Thanksgiving, and I call upon Americans to affirm this day of thanks by their prayers and their gratitude for the many blessings upon this land and its people. I think that Americans everywhere in the world, whatever their political views, are trying to promote a more just world order. And I don't criticize those that are doing it in ways that are different from my own, and I hope they respect the ways that we in the community also try to promote the same ideals and the same goals.
Reagan, are you listening? Reagan, can you hear? You're the only one we fear!
Okay. Members of the Committee of U.S. Citizens residing in Nicaragua yesterday boycotted the ecumenical Thanksgiving Day service to which we had been invited by Anthony Quainton, U.S. Ambassador to Nicaragua, because he used the religious ceremony to read President Reagan's Thanksgiving proclamation, a message which we view as highly insensitive to the situation of the Nicaraguan people.
Ask yourself, if these countries are so rich in natural resources, why the poverty, huh? Why is it that 85% of the people live in subhuman conditions, huh? There has to be a reason. It's not because they're ignorant. It's not because they're lazy. It's not any of those reasons. It's simply because they've been used by the multinationals, by people who want to exploit them, and they haven't united in order to throw off this. Here in Nicaragua, the people united. And because they've had the courage to do that, because the poor have benefited, Washington says it must never be.
Aquí vienen los gringos.
Oh yeah, that's all stone. That's good. Well protected. Wow, you think you're lucky. Yeah. Yes. Very good. Yeah, this would be the refuge for them if there are attacks by plane.
There is.
Area attacks, yes.
Aquí nomás tenemos los bananos para comer.
And you have bananas to eat? Yeah, right? I've been here for 21 years in Nicaragua. I'm working in the rehabilitation program for the prisoners. Usually I spend the mornings in visiting the jails. I have a right to go into any prison, to talk to anyone in private, seeing to their personal needs. This is the Régimen Abierta, which is a farm used by the penitentiary system. The ones here are former National Guardsmen of Somoza. There's no death penalty in Nicaragua. Here people have such a hope, people who have committed grave crimes, but they know that someday and very soon they will be free. In the meantime, they're being treated with such decency, with such respect.
Barricada, órgano oficial del Frente Sandinista, advierte en su edición de ayer sobre el peligro de una intervención militar.
Estoy bien. Bien. Bien, gracias a Dios. Y me siento muy alegre porque ya voy a salir también.
¿Vas a salir?
Sí.
Qué bueno.
Faltan mes. Un mes con 18 días por ahí.
1 month and 18 days he's going to leave.
Sí.
Good. Oh, qué bueno. I'm down here as a missionary. As a missionary, you're supposed to serve the people. The people are the ones who are governing here. They are the ones who are deciding, and for the first time in their lives. the comandantes here have shown us Christians what we should be doing, what we should have done a long time back. They have taught us the Christian message. That's why I have to laugh when I hear the accusations against this country persecuting religion or being atheistic and all of this.
Unidos a todos nuestros jóvenes guardafronteras, unidos a todos los hombres de buena voluntad que buscan la paz, unidos a todos los que están haciendo vigilancia revolucionaria, a todos los que de una y otra forma están haciendo realidad la sociedad nueva y el hombre nuevo en este país, te cantamos y te bendecimos diciéndote: Santo, santo es el Señor, y el universo es Dios. Cante, cante sin cesar.
Si se requiere, pues, si hay una invasión, pues le volamos plomo. Sí. Sea quien sea hondureño, sea contra, sea un marine norteamericano.
Pero ya fue una razón para usar
Una razón, las razones no están dando ellos.
Pero nunca usado ya?
Nunca.
No, you haven't used this yet. Just waiting for the invasion.
The chief strength of Nicaragua lies not in aggressive armaments, but in the simple determination of its people to defend their revolution from invasion at all costs. 50,000 lives were given in the struggle to overthrow Somoza only 4 years ago. It is absolutely clear that Nicaraguans will not allow that sacrifice to have been in vain.
I believe that the American people really are a good-hearted people, and that the more they know about what's happening in Central America, the more they will support countries like Nicaragua that are trying to do something good for the people.
I want to emphasize to the American people that the responsibility really rests with all of us, and especially with the American people who are in the United States right now and have the most access to their elected representatives, to newspapers, and to going out in the streets where they can be heard.
I'd like to actually say a couple of things that I forgot to say beforehand that I was reminded by the video, if that's okay.
Please do.
Okay, so I realized that I forgot to give the specific context of the video itself, which is that the United States had just invaded the small Caribbean country of Grenada, which also had a socialist revolution, President Maurice Bishop. Just a few months earlier, there was just before that, the Marine barracks in Beirut in Lebanon were blown up, and the US was sending ships of reinforcement. They just left the southern United States, passing by the Caribbean on their way to supposedly to Beirut, when they were diverted to invade Grenada, such that the US Marines who landed on Grenada didn't even know that they weren't in Beirut. They had been trained in Arabic and had street maps for Beirut, and immediately got lost when they arrived in Grenada. But the point being that
everybody in Nicaragua was sure that the invasion of Grenada, the whole population of which could fit in one football stadium, was the dry run for invading Nicaragua. Now that turned out not to be the case, but that was the concern at the time. And the specific thing relating to US citizens was that the pretext that the Reagan administration gave for invading Grenada was that the lives of US citizens were in danger by the revolution there, specifically US students who are at a medical school. They had a medical school where some of the medical students were from the United States, people who hadn't gotten accepted in medical school in the US, so they paid to study medicine in Grenada. There were later some very amusing interviews with the medical students that they were in the middle of their anatomy class when all of a sudden a bunch of armed guys knocked down the door in the back of the classroom, and they were US Marines saying that they come to rescue the students, and they're like, can't we wait till class is over? What's going on here? They're obviously in no danger at all, but we as US citizens, and I'm sure Catherine remembers this, were very paranoid that we would be the unwitting pretext for an invasion in Nicaragua, and that was what motivated the US citizens group to do protests outside the US embassy, where the basic slogan was, "Don't rescue me." The other thing that I wanted to say is how the more things change, the more they stay the same, because I was just reading this morning in the Mexican press that Mike Pompeo was just in Brazil and Colombia trying to organize a military intervention in Venezuela, presumably shortly before the US presidential elections. So it just seems like all this time has passed, but nothing very significant has changed in terms of US policy and US imperialism. So I just wanted to add those 2 points before we open to discussion. Over.
Thank you, Peter. Watching that documentary again, I feel like every time I see it, something else new or a new reflection comes up for me too. So it's also an interesting connection for some of us who, well, we weren't alive in the 1980s and came to Nicaragua in a different era, but with a lot of the same ideals of the revolution. But it's very interesting to see the energy of internationalism in the 1980s and people's reflections of living and working here. And I think that's important to have this tie throughout our different generations that are working on similar projects in Nicaragua. So it looks like we have a little bit over half an hour for what I think, Peter, should just be kind of an open discussion. I think it would also be interesting, people are welcome to ask questions, but it's also, we have a lot of people here who also have some interesting, I think, stories, comments, reflections they could also share, and maybe the video also brought back things. So we have Kathy Hoy, who's the founder of Nicaragua Network and coordinated the network for a very long time. We also have Nan McCurdy, who is current editor of Nica Notes, but first came to Nicaragua in the 1980s and has residency in Nicaragua for like 35 years, something like that. Of course, we have Fausto, who had his camera on a little bit ago, but I can turn it off again. And
I see Edgardo in a little picture in my screen.
Edgardo is also here.
Was
I think that they could
playing a very important role at that point.
Yeah, and Edgardo has lots of very entertaining stories and also moving stories about interactions with internationalists who came to accompany the process of the revolution. So people are welcome to unmute your microphone, which if you remember is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and speak. You can ask to speak through the chat. You can raise your hand using the raise hand function, but the conversation is open. So it looks like Kathy opened her microphone. So if you'd like to speak, Kathy, go ahead.
Should I go ahead?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. I just want to relive. First of all, I should correct you that I was in Nicaragua when the Nicaragua Network was founded. So I was there for many years under Somoza and then the first years of the revolution. So I knew about it and I wrote for it, but I wasn't a founder. Anyway, that's another history. But I was there in the time that, this documentary covered, and it was a very scary time. There were specific provocations too on the border that maybe Peter remembers better detail, but I know that people, there was an attempt at a crossing of the border and an attempt to try to attract the Sandinistas into Honduras, and then that would be the signal to come in and invade. And the Sandinistas didn't respond. But my parents in Seattle heard about this and called to find out, you know, what was happening. And also I was supposed to do a Belgian delegation, the northern part of Nicaragua, sort of like a, you know, a delegation, a study tour. And that was canceled because the Belgian bishop, they were Belgian bishops, I think, back in Belgium, had heard these rumors as well. So that's why everybody was digging trenches. If it seemed overdone, it really wasn't. We were sure they were coming. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Kathy. Kathy also has a really interesting, I know you share it every year about, you were in Matagalpa during the final insurrection, right? And you have an interesting article that details what those moments look like just before the triumph of the revolution. Maybe we can share it with our class.
Yeah, I could post it.
Yeah, that would be great. So I think I also saw the microphone open for who I think is Helen. I think it's Helen, is Nicaragua Solidarity, from Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign.
Yeah, hi everybody.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. No, it's actually great to be on this call, and certainly the film actually obviously brought back a lot of memories from me. And Peter, it's an excellent film. There's nothing humiliating about it. Just a couple of comments, because I was actually in Nicaragua in 1985, and I was with the first British brigade that went to Nicaragua. And we were working on the construction of a school with the local community, actually in Leon, and it was on one of the state farms, a cotton farm that had been taken over. It originally belonged to a Somocista. So the history of that area was just horrendous, and that a lot of the campesinos had actually been cleared off the land and taken in trucks kind of in the middle of the night and dumped in Nueva Guinea. I think that was probably in the 70s, but then some of them had actually come back to live in the area. So we talked to them a lot about their experiences of kind of what it was like under Somoza. But and what Peter was saying about, because this was 1985, so the war had actually intensified, the blockade had actually intensified, so there were shortages of absolutely everything you could imagine. And on the state cotton farm, there were these massive cotton harvesters, originally from the US. There are also tractors that are John Deere tractors that I think had come from the US or maybe from Europe. There were red Russian tractors that were kind of replacing them, were completely unsuitable because they were not geared towards tropical conditions. So everything that happened was a kind of, just an amazing kind of invention to kind of circumvent all the difficulties or the tough conditions that were caused by the war and the blockade, and also the huge struggle they were having on those state farms under those conditions to make them kind of viable or in any way viable kind of financially. So I completely relate to what Peter was saying. Yeah, and I think obviously throughout the 1980s was actually kind of pretty massive Nicaragua Solidarity effort within the UK as well, because the Thatcher government was in power, who was very much kind of a big ally, a #1 ally of Ronald Reagan. So the British were involved directly and indirectly, and directly in the case of British mercenaries who were training the Contra and directly responsible for some bombing attacks in Managua, next to a hospital. So Britain was there, it was kind of there all the way. So yeah, I mean, the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who were involved in some way or other, actually obviously inspired by what they found in Nicaragua, and I think it was a really grim time in Britain as well. So I think that for a lot of people going through intense struggles here with unemployment, with privatization, with everything associated with the Thatcher government, going to Nicaragua and was a kind of real revelation for them, and kind of fed into not only Nicaragua solidarity work, but also the struggles that they were going through here in Britain.
Thanks, Helen. Peter, I don't know if you want to make any. Or
Looks like Susan is raising her hand.
Let's do Susan, and then Peter, if you want to make any response after that, we could do that. Go ahead, Susan.
I just, the thing I wrote yesterday, I didn't put in. One thing that really affected me was some Veterans for Peace in 1987 had sent me with some part for a pump. And so I went to Matagalpa to take the pump, and they told me where to take it was a hotel. And I went into the hotel, and there was no adult. There was this little girl about 10, and how come you're not in school? Well, I'm taking care of the hotel. Well, where's your mom? Well, she's not here. Well, where'd she go? She's in Cuba. And I'm thinking, oh, she must be in a class or something. Well, what's she doing in Cuba? Oh, she's being operated on. Well, what happened to her? Well, we were picking up firewood, and this mine exploded and blinded her and blew off her hands. And I just about fainted, you know. It was so terrible thinking of this little girl having to take care of the hotel, and her mother's in Cuba getting her eyes fixed. And oh man, I just felt so awful. But again and again, people told me, you know, what the Contras and the US government are doing, we know is not the same thing as the people that come down here to help. That's it.
I see that Nahendra is connected from Nepal. Hello, Nahendra. And I see Nils and Yorlis. I see Marlene. I see all kinds of people. So shout out to all the folks out there. I was just running through my mind about some currently famous people who were in Nicaragua at that time. The mayor of New York City was an internationalist, Bill Blasio, is that his name? And another internationalist who lives very close to where I live in Chiapas, Mexico, is a Subcomandante Marcos, was an internacionalista at that time in the region, in the Mosquito Indian region of northern Nicaragua. And Bernie Sanders visited a few times. So quite a few people passed through in those days. Who else has some memories or comments or questions?
Maybe Nan? Go ahead, Nan.
Yeah, I also thought it was a really good little documentary. I was a later member of the organization Cusclan. I spent about 3 months in Nicaragua in 1984 and then moved there with my husband in 85. We helped start a faith-based sistering relationship between Baltimore, Maryland, and San Juan de Limay, which is still going strong today. And I think that the basis of building bridges through people just getting to know each other and falling in love with each other has really one of the forms that works in terms of keeping solidarity alive between people. Rationing worked really well in the countryside. I lived for almost 4 years in San Juan de Limay, and I think rationing worked a lot better in the countryside than in the city. I think the Sandinistas were prioritizing food for areas in the countryside as part of probably trying to keep people in the countryside. And I really love hearing all of your reflections about the difference between the development camp and the Campesino camp. Because today, with almost 90% popular economy and so many small and medium farmers producing all of the things Nicaraguans eat, although times are very scary again, you know, people aren't going to go hungry in Nicaragua. That's for darn sure. I don't know if you all saw that on Thursday. The US applied very severe sanctions to all of Iran's financial institutions. And at the same time, they sanctioned, you know, Nicaragua doesn't have many financial institutions. They sanctioned Coruna, and they sanctioned Paul Oquist and a few other people. But the other thing I wanted to mention was about the threat of the invasion. I read something that had the reflections of someone who was in Reagan's government at the time, and then later in the Bush government, most recent Bush government, Robert Gates, and they absolutely were planning to invade Nicaragua. I've read it over and over again. It's frankly a miracle that they didn't. And we know they're pretty much always capable of anything. But I thought it was a really good documentary, and I didn't see you as being idealistic at all. But it's a great reminder of how important focusing on small and medium farmers, local production is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Nan.
So I think it's important to remember, as I was saying before, that many of the changes were much more radical and structural in the Sandinista revolution than they had been in the more recent progressive cycle of governments. And I'm thinking of healthcare, thinking of education, administration of justice, changing the actual parliamentary system, creating more democratic institutions, more democratic representative ways of electing governments, of having people organized in neighborhoods, in cooperatives. So the fact that U.S. imperialism eventually triumphed, and that maybe some mistakes by the Sandinistas, because by not supporting the peasantry sufficiently, that allowed part of the peasantry to be recruited by the CIA for the Contras. So there was kind of an Achilles heel thing going on there. But aside from that, I actually consider that the revolution was very successful in most of the different areas or ambits of society, and more so than many of the countries in the recent cycle, in the sense that the transformations were more structural, and the more recent governments have only made kind of like assistentialist public support programs, but haven't been able to make those kinds of radical transformations. So I think it's important to remember that. And I'm also remembering the worst night of my life up to that point was the night of the elections, when the Sandinistas lost the elections. And I remember going to sleep, they were still counting the vote, but with the television on, and waking up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, first in my dream, hearing Daniel Ortega's concession speech saying that they had lost the election. And I thought I was having a nightmare, that it wasn't true, that I was still dreaming. But then I did wake up and convince myself that I really was watching it. And I see various people shaking their heads on the screen. That was a really, really tough moment for everybody who had put so much love and commitment and energy, all of the Nicaraguan people who had struggled so hard, and all of the internationalists who were we were trying to help that process. So that was a very difficult moment. And it's incredible, as I said before, that we have exactly the same situation, the build up towards a potential military intervention now in Venezuela, just like the build-up in 1983 to the possible military intervention in Nicaragua. So more things change, the more they stay the same in terms of imperialism. Over.
Okay. Let's see. I see. Let's see. Stan raised his hand, and then we'll go back to Kathy. Oh, and I think Edgardo also wants to speak. So maybe we'll do Edgardo, Stan, and Kathy.
Sí. Bueno, yo quiero contribuir a la memoria de este relato colectivo con una experiencia.
Now I want to add information to this historic talk. A practical resistance that was built up from the farmers and the workers. We were the ones who planned to recuperate farming, the historic farming. It was a time when we have to face the military, and we were able to transfer some production means and send to those machinery, to send the machinery to the war zones. At some point, we were relaxed, not working too much on the farming production. So it was us, the workers, who started working, organizing everyone on organize the farming and the productivity, the quality of the food production. And we started working on innovations just to make possible those old machines, broken machines were repaired and even make them in town. Probably was somehow the Cuban model, where you see the old cars in use from the 50s, mid-century, from the 20th century. That same movement that built us, the people's organization, so the economy started to work in the middle of that harassment, in the terrible circumstances Nicaragua was in. Also, there were many things that happened during that time that had to do with some areas where the farmers were, some communities were isolated. Sometimes because the big landowners and the Catholic Church leaders, they blockade some areas. We have an expert from Cuba who came down to help us to organize the Chiltepe farm, a workers' farm, in some way allowed us that when the milk was not coming from the provinces to the capital. So we in Chiltepe, it was a nearby farm, we were able to milk the cows that we never have seen those from in Nicaragua, from Canada, Holstein cows. So there was a famous debate how we can solve the problems directly to face the war, the impacts of the war. Also, I want to say something to the other point, things that happen at the international level. As Grenada historic invasion, the people from different countries in Latin America, they started a group named Contadora group that brought up Latin America to the world, the peace talk, the peace debate. Many things happened in those years, as Che Guevara says. They killed Roldós they also killed Torrijos in Panama, and also killed, even though they don't accept now the Europeans, they also killed Olof Palme in Norway. During those years when the peace voices were up, at the same time they were tackling, they had target people. In the whole debate, those people were opposing the Nicaraguan invasion. But Honduras was invaded. Also, there were plans to invade Guatemala and El Salvador. Plans were. We were surrounded by Costa Rica as well. We were very surrounded by the neighboring countries in the borders. And they were killing us. They were also killing the international leaders who were opposed to the war zone, to the war in the invasion. I just wanted to add that to Peter, our brothers and sisters, to Peter, our brother here. So now we have a new context, and it's very likely to what happened in the 80s. Thanks so much. Thanks, Peter. Greetings. Greetings, Edgardo.
So I noted Stan and then Kathy.
I was wondering if you could,
Me estaba preguntando si usted puede hablar sobre de cuáles países, de dónde venían los internacionalistas. También había muchos de Cuba, después de Inglaterra, Canadá, Estados Unidos, pero habían otros de Europa del Este, de la Unión Soviética.
Union's house. I had a lot of friends from Cuba. Bulgarians were working in the Via de Sebaco. People from both Western Europe, Eastern Europe. I was a professor together with a professor from East Germany, who's now a professor in Chiapas, actually. And then, as I said, from all over Latin America. I mean, almost probably every country in Latin America had internationalists. So everywhere in Europe, everywhere in Latin America. And occasionally you'd see people passing through from Africa and Asia, although I don't remember living there full time, but quite possibly as well as all the other Central American countries too.
Was there any interaction between all these people from other countries while they were in Nicaragua? Was there
a lot of interaction. We had it was an internationalist community. So, for example, I still visit, when I go to Havana, I still visit Cubans who I met when I was in Nicaragua at that time. And I have a significant part of my network of friends in the United States are people who were in Nicaragua at that time. And people from Argentina, from Brazil. It was everything. It was a kind of a tight-knit community, the internationalist community at that time, because everybody was there from political solidarity. Everybody was doing political work. And so there was really a lot in common and a lot of political debate over beers in the evenings.
Do you want me to go now, Erica?
Go ahead.
Okay. I would add also that the many countries in South America were under dictatorships at that time. We had, remember, Operation Condor and Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay. And so many there were many internationalists who came to also in exile in Nicaragua, but at the same time offered their solidarity cooperation. I have a question, I guess, for anybody who wants to comment on it about the parallels between the time that both Peter and I have written about this in Nicaragua, the divisions between what Peter called the developmentalists and the campesinists. And as I pointed out, is that by about 84, there began to be changes in what sector was favored and a move toward giving out more land to the peasants to farm on their own or in cooperative. And I wanted to see if people thought there was a likeness now, which I think a couple of people referred to, with the FSLN government's alliance in recent years with COSEP and big business, big agriculture, which came to an abrupt end with the coup attempt in 2018. And some writers have noted that there's been a move now to favor more and pay more attention to the small production sector. And I was wondering if some of you experts in agriculture and production would comment on that. Maybe Niels.
Yes, can we just, before, we have a slight interpretation tech glitch that I want to get sorted out before something happens in the middle of someone talking. So if you just give me just a second to add Jill back. Hold on just a second. Okay, I think Jill, you're back, right? Can you hear us?
Sí.
Sí.
Sí, Magda, te escucho bien.
Sí.
I'm just trying to add back Jill in the booth. Hold on.
Ahora sí.
We just had a little bit of. Let's see.
A ver.
Hold on, just
2018 fue clave para sacar a relucir los músculos de la producción campesina.
En el 2018 fue un momento clave. It was a very important time to get back in the leaders also discuss some of the issues. For example, the Catholic Church played a very important role there, but finally the farmers were the ones, small farmers were the ones who brought the food to the markets, and there was no shortage of food. I don't know how to call that the cheese market. For example, the cheese market that travels to El Salvador. I don't know if it goes to the industry in El Salvador, but the cheese market, the cheese sales during the road blockades, the price went down in Nicaragua, so there was a big offer of cheese, and it was half of the price in Nicaragua in all the markets. There was enough cheese. There was enough beans, fruits, everything, all the nutrients. The markets were not short of any produce. For example, we saw the month of the different seasonal fruits like mangoes, bananas, and cassava, all those, all that produce from any way, made the way down to the road blockades. The large supermarkets, the large markets closed, but the small market, the farmers market, offer everything to the people. And even more, we have asked the president, please make agreements with the small farmers, but not to block any of the markets, because we want to continue offering everything in the small markets. In that direction, the small and medium farmer is extraordinary now, and they are the ones supplying the food demand in Nicaragua. And we saw that in the 80s that there were some shortages of food, and we have to put pressure on the food commission here in Nicaragua, and not to allow the food imports. If we had enough potatoes production, we put pressure on them. Do not allow potatoes imports. And now they have regulated the food imports, and the local farmers have now seen more space and built on the great experience, because it's linked to the same that we were explaining before. The farmers are now more in charge, and also working with the police and the market orientation. That's how we see a big opportunity, and we see the advances here. I wanted to say that it's one of our strengths that we have Nicaragua has something that is different from Venezuela and Cuba. And it's very important to mention here, and even from other countries, maybe we can study more from other countries, but in Nicaragua, the workforce, the labor workforce, 43% or more is linked to the land. It's farming, it's agriculture. That 43% of the labor force as social structure is huge. Linked to the land, and the agrarian reform made that possible. But also we did reforms with those farmers who were against fighting the government, and we made advancements with the land office here in Nicaragua, land tenure office. They have solved lots of discussions, and they have created a very peaceful environment in the rural areas, because they recognize that people are attached to the land. Once the government took over the government in this last year, now they have more space in the markets. So we can say that the country stabilization is just linked to foreign forces, but with no rural support. From 2018, there was no support from rural farmers to what happened. The other thing is that the farmers, the communities, the indigenous communities, the fishermen, and the migrants who travel to Costa Rica to work, those are also rural population who are linked to that culture of farming and producing in the land. So there is a connection, strong connection, linked to protect the forest, to protect the land resources, and we can make some advancements there, and push the philosophy of protecting the natural resources. So we have a big scenario of social networking in the culture of the local economies. Something that is different in those countries that have been more urbanized societies, and land becomes a very difficult process.
Thank you, Edgardo. So I'm looking at the time. Nils has asked to speak, so maybe what we could do is Nils could speak, and then Peter, you could give any concluding comments or concluding reactions, and then Fausto will have a few closing words. Go ahead, Nils.
Thank you, everyone. This has been really, really fun to see, and really a beautiful party across all kinds of distances. But I feel great seeing all of you and being together. To me, the lesson here is that revolutions really are just the most giant pedagogical event ever, because people learn in so many different ways. So the feeling I get out of this is first to thank everyone who's on this call who participated in the insurrection and in the revolution in Nicaragua, because that made all of these different cascades of learning over generations possible. And then to thank everyone who spent time in Nicaragua in the 80s, risking, losing their jobs in the United States, running out of money, but also putting themselves in physical risk, and being willing to sweat and really, really work together with a very poor population that was trying to live with dignity and protect itself. And I completely agree that living together, working together, raising food together is such a crucial way of building solidarity on a much deeper level than political analysis. And the other lesson that I get is that with all of the complexity and the mistakes of the 1980s, the internationalists who were in Nicaragua had a fundamental understanding, which was anti-imperialism. And so despite any mistakes that the Nicaraguan government could be making at the time, there was a commitment that each country had the right to create its own form of government, its own kind of democracy, and that the United States, just out of its military power, did not have the right to intervene in those countries. And I feel like that's something that has been eroded over the last several decades, is this feeling of critical support, right? Of being able to criticize and being able to recognize errors and huge problems and the ways that it's very difficult, obviously, to build a revolution today, right? We don't see many examples, but there's efforts. And nowadays, I feel like as soon as people can find something to criticize, it's very difficult for them to take any action in solidarity. And that's something that I really, really respect this generation that was in Nicaragua in the 1980s for having this ethical basis for being able to see problems wherever they are, but also understand how to be on the right side of history. And I really commend people like Erica, who have been absolutely crucial to the rebuilding of an internationalist perspective, being there, working with the ATC, working with the Via Campesina in Nicaragua, which has a very clear perspective about these agrarian issues, a very clear perspective about land, the climate crisis that we're living in today, and the need for land-based agroecological solutions around food, around justice. So I'm just really impressed by this whole group of people who are here. I think that all of you are really, really key. And I really am excited to be part of this big community. So thanks so much for this session today.
So I just wanted to highlight that I put into the chat a very good one-page summary article of Mike Pompeo's trip to Venezuela and to Brazil and Colombia in the last few days, because I think all of us who are concerned about Latin America and U.S. intervention have to be on red alert, because the Trump administration is likely to do any kind of crazy thing.
With the support of the Democrats.
Peter, you went away.
Because it's just unbelievable that the same things are happening all over again. I want to say that it's great to have this opportunity to share, to see so many people that I know from then and from now. And I'm also really happy to see that folks from Yala Ilem Ishu Ilem are connected, because I think that this work that ITC is doing now in training a new generation of young people in Central America with agroecology and political organizing skills is something that's really carrying forward this banner of struggle in the 21st century. And that seeing, for example, that Marlon is connected makes me happy and gives me a lot of hope for the work that we're doing in all of the different organizations in Via Campesina to keep alive this campesinista vision of how to solve the great problems facing humanity and Mother Earth. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Fausto?
No. Yo creo que
I think that this is a good time for the Linder Solidarity School, after seeing that video, to remember the work that so many people did in solidarity with Nicaragua. We also recall the failed coup in 2018. Erica's interrupting Fausto because there's Erica's interrupting. Sorry, excuse the interruption, Fausto, but we're having intermittent audio from you. Maybe you could put on your headphones. Yes, now we can hear you better. It's very important and interesting what we're doing here with the Ben Linder Solidarity School. I remember so many of our colleagues from the United States and Europe who were in solidarity with Nicaragua because they're internationalists. And I also remember, fortunately, the sound is intermittent again. It's something about people in '84. There were some people who I met through solidarity. And I'm very happy also to know there's some, oh, that Erica is from the same city as Ben Linder, Portland. So we see that young people from the United States and Europe are working on this. And we have this great community. I think that there will not be an invasion of Nicaragua because of the international solidarity with Nicaragua and also because of the bravery of the Nicaraguan people. You can see what people were doing, digging trenches to protect themselves. And I think that there's a big lesson there. For many people, this is the revolution that has the most international solidarity, and that for a decade put off the United States. Many of the internationalist compañeros in Nicaragua are still working there, have gone on to other countries. This is very important, not only because we were able to have a nostalgic tour through the 1980s, but also because there's a new generation that did not live through that period, but are now working in the same spirit. And these have been the most difficult times in our history, but we know that you continue to be with us. And we have the NICA Act and the Magnitsky Act. So we need to call upon international solidarity to help us get through this. Venezuela and Nicaragua will survive these blockades thanks to international solidarity, because this is part of how we defend this political process with these progressive governments. And more than anything, we need the solidarity of peoples. Peoples of the United States, Canada, and Europe need to express their solidarity. Unfortunately, the sound is so poor that thank you very much. And I thank Peter Rosset for being such a faithful friend. Eric.
There are a lot of, I think our generation today is learning a lot from the generation of the 1980s. Nils also said that, and we want to, I think in an even more challenging time, retake the topic of anti-imperialism, an accompaniment of both popular movements like La Via Campesina, Via Campesina, and the organizations that make up the movement like the ATC, as well as revolutions like the Sandinista Revolution. So thank you for your time, Peter. Hopefully we can have another conversation, and we should let you go to bed since it's very late where you are.
Probably Nahendra wants to go to bed as well in Nepal. So great to see everybody, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Take care.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Peter, saludas a Chalma Ligutan.
Say hi to Chalma Ligutan, Peter, says Fausto.
A little bit of time left, which we wanted to dedicate to doing a report back of the conversations that we had in the 3 breakout groups last week. So if you remember, we got to hear last week from Jenny, Karina, and Betty, who are both 3 young friends of the ATC who have played a very big role in helping to organize this course. Unfortunately, all 3 are out today for different reasons, and Hetty was going to give us a report back, but she had a family emergency. I'm going to mute Nahendra. Okay. Of course, we do have, we are going to hear the report back, and that report back will be shared with us by Avery. I think we didn't get to introduce Avery last week, but Avery is a young friend of the ATC based in LA, who has played such an important role in strengthening and growing the Friends of the ATC work with young North Americans, and someone who I think we can think of as a true internationalist, a true person of trust, a true person who, a person who truly accompanies the work of the ATC and the work of the Sandinista Revolution. in a very militant way. So thank you, Avery, also for being here every week and helping with the tech side. So I'll pass it over to you, Avery, and you can share the report back. And then if there's time, we have about 15 minutes. It'd be nice if you want to facilitate any initial comments, or we can see if people can put comments in the chat box as well.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, so I'm filling in for Betty because she wasn't able to make it, but she was awesome and shared her notes that she put together, which are pretty extensive. Erica, what do you think about me sharing the screen with the notes? Because there's a lot to cover, and maybe I'll read them out, but it might be good for people to read as I share them.
I think that's fine. Yeah, and we can also share it via email, but it's good how the visual also helps the interpretation.
Cool. And I'm sorry if you guys hear my neighbor. They're rebuilding their house next door, so it's a lot of noise in the background. But so we had 3 groups. For those who weren't here last week, there were 3 groups who went into individual breakout rooms. One was about media, one was how to fundraise, and then one was what do we do with the actual materials themselves from the course, because we've had an awesome team recording and also taking notes. So how do we then publicize this work? And I guess the idea is like, it's awesome that we've been doing this course, that we do a lot of informational work, but how to make our solidarity more concrete. One theme that came across in all 3 groups, as you'll see in the first paragraph, was all 3 groups talked about how there's such a misunderstanding about the current context in Nicaragua, specifically the advances that the Sandinista government has made over the last 14 years. So how can we better publicize the real successes that have occurred? And so the first group that we're gonna discuss is the one that dealt specifically with the Solidarity School's materials. And so I don't think Katja's here today, but I think she might have video editing experience. So she is planning to potentially help with that. And then in terms of the ideas that we came up with, one is to kind of create a syllabus with a maybe potentially new way of ordering the videos. So it might make more sense to people who weren't able to attend all the courses. And then also working on transcribing and getting the videos as accessible as possible in both English and Spanish, in part because there seems to be a lot of awesome materials in general in Spanish about Nicaragua today, but there's not that much in English or circulating in English media. So also, there's some conversation about graphic design experience and how I guess the anti-FSLN stuff is often like really professionally done and like really attractive to people who might not know what's going on. So we need to combat that with their own graphic design work. Then how are we going to publicize this online, whether that be making a website or using the Friends of the ATC website, so that we can have like one central place where people can visit. And then we also can email that link to the website to people. And finally, from that group was this conversation about what our audience could be. And I'm guessing one of the members in that conversation was involved with UK climate change groups or agroecology in the UK, because there's some conversation about that, but then also other ideas where people within La Via Campesina, and then climate justice groups, food justice, Latin American Solidarity Network, students, and college professors. The second group was around media, and I guess just tactics in general for kind of getting the truth out on both the political context and the agricultural context in Nicaragua. And so that could be short informational videos on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. I think the Friends of the ATC, we've recently set up an Instagram, maybe in the last month or 2 months, and it's been really successful for us. I think it's already growing a lot faster than maybe Facebook has been recently, and especially if we're trying to be in contact with younger people, Instagram and TikTok are great resources. So there's WhatsApp, which is good for groups. And then I think there was a conversation when you see different angles, it's about how can we connect the context in Nicaragua to maybe other groups. So if there's a lot of people concerned about immigration or migrant justice, how does imperialism relate back to that? And how can we look at the example of Nicaragua and maybe make those connections for people? Then there was some conversation about having, like, again, short clips or sound bites, like kind of how last week we had a conversation with different peasant campesina leaders and how maybe we could get sound bites from people like them about like why people stay in Nicaragua opposed to migrating. And then, yeah, one last thing is about kind of exposing what the opposition is. I know, like in the States, if you were to have been following in 2018, you'd have thought there was like every single youth in the country was rising up against the Nicaraguan government. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and the opposition really, they might have a lot of traction on social media, but they don't really have a social base or political base, economic base in Nicaragua in the way that the FSLN does. So the last group was the fundraising summary, the fundraising group. And so the initial ideas were how to focus the funds on a specific area of the ATC's work. So the ATC organizes on a departmental level, which are like states or provinces in Nicaragua. So whether it's to target a specific area where we could focus our funds, or look at the needs of young farmers, since a big aspect of ATC's work and the Friends of ATC work is how to get youth involved in agriculture. Other themes are organic farming, agroecology, access to land, food sovereignty, broad issues that call the attention of farmers and support family farming. And then in terms of like the grants themselves, there's conversations about small grants that we could fundraise through individual donations, and that could be just like smaller personal networks, and then how maybe to do some grant writing to get larger funds, which I don't know if the ATC or Friends ATC have had success with in the past, but that could be a good option. And then again, I guess all these things relate back to each other. So if we're going to have a campaign, we need to make sure that we connect with media folks who can boost our campaign. And then finally, if you are like want to like give back immediately, having been in the course and gotten a lot out of it, one way to do that is through the Alliance for Global Justice's page, or through, yeah, basically our donations. The way that I think we can receive individual donations is through the Alliance for Global Justice's website. So if you're looking for a way to do that, that would be the place to visit. So I've covered like a lot of things, and so this is a conversation that's we're gonna probably keep on having next week and then beyond the course. And so we wanted to outline all those different areas that we plan on building in, so that if you feel really attached or connected to one of those options, you can reach out and become part of that process. And then also, if, I don't know, we have, I guess, 10 minutes left today, or less than that, 8 minutes. So if anybody has any immediate reactions to some of that planning from last week, this would be a good place to express that, so that we can connect your ideas to the other leaders or other organizers who weren't able to be here today. I know, Erica, if you have thoughts.
Erika, no sé si tiene cosas que decir. Sí, cosas que yo tal vez falté. Bueno, si podemos hablar, alguien si quiere decir, pueden levantar la mano.
Go ahead, Stan.
Vaya, Stan, ahora sigues vos. Después Dave.
Can you send out a copy of that
Puedes
letter?
enviar.
It's easier to read it over.
Yes, we'll send out via email.
Especially after an hour and a half of a webinar.
We'll send the summary out via email and also give clear instructions a channel to give feedback.
Y después vamos a pedir que nos envíen algún retroalimentación. Yo miré que Dave también tenía su mano levantada.
Hi,
David, si quieres hablar.
I just wanted to make. I was in the media group.
Yo estaba en el grupo de los medios.
And I just wanted to make the point that we talked a lot about social media, but the key thing was to give a positive message about Nicaragua on social media, because the message is so short and sharp.
Mensajes cortos.
And an afterthought I had was a lot of people on social media are on there to read about themselves, so not to take it too seriously.
Y alguna gente no se lo toma muy serio a veces las cosas que se dicen seriamente, entonces. Una cosa que no cubrimos la semana pasada y Patricia lo dijo hoy en el chat era cosas como trabajar con el Congreso. Y hoy tenemos otra situación, es que ahorita cualquier senador del Congreso está contra Nicaragua. Parte de mí que dice, no vale la pena ni ir ahí. Hay otra parte de mí que dice, bueno, si alguien tiene algún potencial para estar aliado en esto, deberíamos trabajar. Porque ahora no creo que haya alguien ahí, de todos los que están ahí, van a estar a favor de Nicaragua en el Congreso. Helen, ¿estamos escuchando bien español?
I see Magda's interpreting, but someone wrote me saying they had an issue.
Yo sé que Magda está interpretando, pero ¿alguien dijo algo? ¿Están escuchando en español, Fausto? ¿Alguien que está escuchando en español puede decir si están escuchando?
¿Se está escuchando en español?
No se escucha.
Yo creo que Magda, creo que ahorita estás en el canal de inglés. Vamos a ver ahora. How about now? Are you
Ahora
hearing
sí,
okay
Magda.
in Spanish? Okay.
Gracias, Magda, ahora sí.
Muy bien, gracias. Okay, so we can continue. I think Helen. Go ahead, Helen.
Okay, I think this is actually a question for the ATC. Is it better for the ATC if we just raise general funds and then the ATC actually decides the best way of distributing those funds? Or would you prefer that we raised funds for a particular project? And I think I mean, this is very specific to the UK, but I mean, next year, because next year, COP26 it's been postponed from this year, but it's supposed to be in Glasgow in November next year. So climate justice is going to be a huge issue in the UK and will be globally. And you can see the momentum already building up. So we need to think of ways of actually taking advantage of that space, but actually kind of promoting social, economic and climate justice. But I think it's a really good opportunity to broaden that discussion.
Avery, did you see anyone else that raised their hand or?
I didn't see anyone else.
What we can do maybe is take these initial comments and systematize them along with the document that we just presented and send it via email. And we'll give everyone a couple days to make any initial comments. And then we have time scheduled into next session too to kind of go to the concrete decision phase. But those are some really interesting comments that everyone had, and I look forward to looking at the document again to make a couple more comments. So we are out of time for today's class. Avery, thank you so much for giving the report back, and also for being here all of these weeks to support the school. Before we close, two things quickly. First, as always, a big thank you to Magda and Jill, who are here this week being our interpretation team. Yay, you always get a big round of applause. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. Also, Nan, thank you for being our chat box translator. Also couldn't do this without you. A quick announcement, which you should have all gotten by email, is that this Wednesday, there's an event at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time for US hours. Oh, I'm sorry, I mixed up the time. Scratch that. 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, 5:30 p.m. Nicaragua time. That will touch upon a couple different topics that are successes of the Sandinista Revolution. Specifically going to be talking about the topic of the community policing system or policing system, and Caribbean Coast autonomy. And there'll be 3 women speakers, but 2 of the women will be women who are member organizations of Via Campesina here from Nicaragua. So I'm gonna see if I can put the announcement in the chat box here, but we can also send it via a follow-up email. So if you want to sign up, you do need to register in advance to participate. It's on Wednesday, October 14th. I'm not sure if I said that. There's the announcement in the chat box, so you can read more on your own. We'll send it again through WhatsApp and through the email. So next week, we are going to be talking about international solidarity with social movements and looking specifically at the experience of Why Hunger, which is an ally organization to the ATC, to Via Campesina, and also collaborates a lot with friends of the ATC. Betty, who you all heard from last week, is a staff member of Why Hunger. Saulo Araujo, who's the director of the Global Movements Program, is going to be sharing his time with us, and we hope that you can all come, because it'll also be another chance like today to share your own experiences, share your own opinions, your own thoughts. So thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye.